Complete list of articles of the Indian Constitution. Part 1. The Union and its territory. Articles 1 to 4. Article 1. Name and territory of India. Article 2. Admission or establishment of new states. Article 3. Formation of new states and alteration of areas, boundaries, or names. Article 4. Laws made under Articles 2 and 3 to amend the 1st and 4th schedules. Part 2. Citizenship. Articles 5 से 11. Article 5. Citizenship at the commencement of the Constitution. Article 6. Rights of citizenship of certain persons who migrated from Pakistan. Article 7. Rights of citizenship of certain migrants to Pakistan. Article 8. Rights of citizenship of certain persons of Indian origin residing outside India. Article 9. Persons voluntarily acquiring foreign citizenship not to be Indian citizens. Article 10. Continuance of citizenship rights. Article 11. Parliament's power to regulate the right of citizenship. Part 3. Fundamental rights. Articles 12 to 35. Article 12. Definition of state for fundamental rights. Article 13. Laws inconsistent with or in derogation of fundamental rights. Article 14. Equality before law. Article 15. Prohibition of discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Article 16. Equality of opportunity in matters of public employment. Article 17. Abolition of untouchability. Article 18. Abolition of titles except military and academic distinctions. Article 19. Protection of 6 freedoms: speech, assembly, association, movement, residence, and profession. Article 20. Protection in respect of conviction for offences. Article 21. Protection of life and personal liberty. Article 21A. Right to education, free and compulsory education for children aged 6 to 14. Article 22. Protection against arbitrary arrest and detention. Article 23. Prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor. Article 24. Prohibition of employment of children in factories, etc. Article 25. Freedom of conscience and free profession, practice, and propagation of religion. Article 26. Freedom to manage religious affairs. Article 27. Freedom from taxation for promotion of any religion. Article 28. Freedom from religious instruction in educational institutions. Article 29. Protection of interests of minorities. Article 30. Right of minorities to establish and administer educational institutions. Article 31. Right to property, repealed. Article 32. Right to constitutional remedies, power of Supreme Court to issue writs. Article 33. Parliament's power to modify fundamental rights for armed forces. Article 34. Restriction on rights while martial law is in force. Article 35. Power of Parliament to legislate on fundamental rights. Part 4. Directive Principles of State Policy. Articles 36 to 51. Article 36. Definition of Directive Principles. Article 37. Application of Directive Principles. Article 38. State to secure a social order for the promotion of the welfare of the people. Article 39. Principles of policy to be followed by the state. Article 39A. Equal justice and free legal aid. Article 40. Organization of village panchayats. Article 41. Right to work, education, and public assistance in certain cases. Article 42. Provision for just and humane conditions of work and maternity relief. Article 43. Living wage, etc. for workers. Article 43A. Participation of workers in management of industries. Article 44. Uniform Civil Code for the citizens. Article 45 Provision for early childhood care and education for children below 6 years. Article 46 Promotion of educational and economic interests of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other weaker sections. Article 47 Duty of the state to raise the level of nutrition and the standard of living. Article 48 Organization of agriculture and animal husbandry. Article 48 Protection and improvement of the environment and safeguarding of forests and wildlife. Article 49 Protection of monuments and places of national importance. Article 50 Separation of judiciary from the executive. Part 4A Fundamental Duties. Article 51A. Article 51 Promotion of international peace and security. Article 51A Fundamental Duties of every citizen of India. Part V The Union. Articles 52 to 151. The President and Vice President. Articles 52 to 78. Article 52 The President of India. Article 53 Executive Power of the Union. Article 54 Election of the President. Article 55 Manner of election of the President. Article 56 Term of office of President. Article 57 Eligibility for re-election as President. Article 58 Qualifications for election as President. Article 59 Conditions of President's office. Article 60 Oath or affirmation by the President. Article 61 Procedure for impeachment of the President. Article 62 Time of holding an election to fill a vacancy in the office of President. Article 63 The Vice President of India. Article 64 The Vice President to be ex officio Chairman of the Rajya Sabha. Article 65 Vice President to act as President in certain contingencies. Article 66 Election of the Vice President. Article 67 Term of office of Vice President. Article 68 Time of holding election to fill a vacancy in the office of Vice President. Article 69 Oath or affirmation by the Vice President. Article 70 Discharge of President's functions in other contingencies. Article 71 Matters relating to or connected with the election of a President or Vice President. Article 72 Powers of the President to grant pardons, reprieves, respites, or remissions of punishment. Article 73 Extent of executive power of the Union. Article 74 Council of Ministers to aid and advise the President. Article 75 Appointment, tenure, and salaries of Prime Minister and Ministers. Article 76 Attorney General for India. Article 77 Conduct of business of the Government of India. Article 78 Duties of the Prime Minister regarding furnishing information to the President. Parliament. Articles 79 से 122. Article 79 Constitution of Parliament. Article 80 Composition of Rajya Sabha. Article 81 Composition of Lok Sabha. Article 82 Readjustment of seats after each census. Article 83 Duration of Houses of Parliament. Article 84 Qualification for membership of Parliament. Article 85 Sessions of Parliament, Prorogation, and Dissolution. Article 86 Right of President to address and send messages to Parliament. Article 87 Special Address by the President. Article 88 Rights of Ministers and Attorney General in Parliament. Article 89 Chairman and Deputy Chairman of the Rajya Sabha. Article 90 Vacation, Resignation, and Removal of Deputy Chairman of Rajya Sabha. Article 91 Power of Deputy Chairman or other persons to perform duties of the office. Article 92 The Chairman or Deputy Chairman not to preside while a resolution for his removal is under consideration. Article 93 Speaker and Deputy Speaker of Lok Sabha. Article 94 Vacation, Resignation, and Removal of Speaker and Deputy Speaker of Lok Sabha. Article 95 Power of Deputy Speaker to act as Speaker. Article 96 The Speaker not to preside while a resolution for his removal is under consideration. Article 97 Salaries and allowances of the Speaker, Deputy Speaker, Chairman, and Deputy Chairman. Article 98 Secretariat of Parliament. Article 99 Oath or affirmation by members of Parliament. Article 100 Voting in Houses. Power of Houses to act notwithstanding vacancies. Parliament. Articles 101 से 122 continued. Article 101 Vacation of seats in Parliament. Article 102 Disqualifications for membership of Parliament. Article 103 Decision on questions as to disqualifications of members. Article 104 A penalty for sitting and voting before taking an oath or when disqualified. Article 105 Powers, Privileges, and Immunities of Parliament and its members. Article 106 Salaries and Allowances of Members. Article 107 Provisions regarding introduction and passing of bills. Article 108 Joint sitting of both houses in certain cases. Article 109 Special procedure in respect of money bills. Article 110 Definition of money bills. Article 111 Assent to bills by the President. Article 112 Annual Financial Statement, Union Budget. Article 113 Procedure in Parliament with respect to estimates. Article 114 Appropriation Bills. Article 115 Supplementary, Additional, or Excess Grants. Article 116 Vote on Account, Vote of Credit, and Exceptional Grants. Article 117 Special Provisions as to Financial Bills. Article 118 Rules of Procedure in Parliament. Article 119 Regulation by Law of Procedure in Parliament in relation to financial business. Article 120 Language to be used in Parliament. Article 121 Restriction on discussion in Parliament. Article 122 Courts not to inquire into proceedings of Parliament. Legislative powers of the President, Articles 123 to 123. Article 123 Power of President to promulgate ordinances. Union Judiciary, Articles 124 से 147. Article 124 Establishment and Constitution of the Supreme Court. Article 125 Salaries and Allowances of Supreme Court Judges. Article 126 Appointment of Acting Chief Justice. Article 127 Appointment of Ad hoc Judges. Article 128 Attendance of retired judges at sittings of the Supreme Court. Article 129 Supreme Court to be a court of record. Article 130 Seat of the Supreme Court. Article 131 Original Jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Article 132 Appellate Jurisdiction of Supreme Court in constitutional cases. Article 133 Appellate Jurisdiction of Supreme Court in civil matters. Article 134 Appellate Jurisdiction of Supreme Court in criminal matters. Article 135 Jurisdiction and powers of the Federal Court under existing law. Article 136 Special leave to appeal by the Supreme Court. Article 137 Review of judgments or orders by the Supreme Court. Article 138 Enlargement of jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Article 139 Conferment on the Supreme Court of powers to issue certain writs. Article 140 Ancillary Powers of the Supreme Court. Article 141 Law declared by the Supreme Court to be binding on all courts. Article 142 Enforcement of decrees and orders of Supreme Court. Article 143 Power of President to consult Supreme Court. Article 144 Civil and judicial authorities to act in aid of the Supreme Court. Article 145 Rules of Court for the Supreme Court. Article 146 Officers and Servants and Expenses of the Supreme Court. Article 147 Interpretation of the Constitution. Controller and Auditor General of India. Articles 148 to 151. Article 148 Controller and Auditor General of India, CAG. Article 149 Duties and Powers of the Controller and Auditor General. Article 150 Form of Accounts of the Union and States. Article 151 Audit Reports of the Controller and Auditor General. Part 6 The States, Articles 150 to 237. General, Articles 152 से 152. Article 152 Definition of State, excluding JK, now removed after Article 370 Abrogation. The Executive, Articles 153 से 167. Article 153 Governors of States. Article 154 Executive Power of the State. Article 155 Appointment of Governor. Article 156 Term of Office of Governor. Article 157 Qualifications for Appointment as Governor. Article 158 Conditions of Governor's Office. Article 159 Oath or Affirmation by the Governor. Article 160 Discharge of Governor's functions in certain contingencies. Article 161 Power of Governor to grant pardons, etc. Article 162 Extent of executive power of the state. Article 163 Council of Ministers to aid and advise Governor. Article 164 Other provisions as to ministers, including Chief Minister. Article 165 Advocate General for the State. Article 166 Conduct of Business of the State Government. Article 167 Duties of Chief Minister regarding furnishing information to the Governor. The State Legislature, Articles 168 से 212. Article 168 Constitution of Legislatures in States. Article 169 Abolition or creation of legislative councils in states. Article 170 Composition of legislative assemblies. Article 171 Composition of legislative councils. Article 172 Duration of state legislatures. Article 173 Qualification for membership of the state legislature. Article 174 Sessions of the state legislature, prorogation and dissolution. Article 175 Right of Governor to address and send messages to the House. Article 176 Special Address by the Governor. Article 177 Rights of Ministers and Advocate General in the House. Article 178 Speaker and Deputy Speaker of Legislative Assembly. Article 179 Vacation, resignation, and removal of Speaker and Deputy Speaker. Article 180 Power of Deputy Speaker to act as Speaker. Article 181 Speaker not to preside while a resolution for removal is under consideration. Article 182 Chairman and Deputy Chairman of Legislative Council. Article 183 Vacation, resignation, and removal of Chairman and Deputy Chairman. Article 184 Power of Deputy Chairman to act as Chairman. Article 185 Chairman or Deputy Chairman not to preside while a resolution for removal is under consideration. Article 186 Salaries and allowances of the Speaker, Deputy Speaker, Chairman, and Deputy Chairman. Article 187 Secretariat of the State Legislature. Article 188 Oath or affirmation by members of the State Legislature. Article 189 Voting in Houses, Power of Houses to act notwithstanding vacancies. Article 190 Vacation of seats in the State Legislature. Article 191 Disqualifications for membership of the State Legislature. Article 192 Decision on questions as to disqualifications of members. Article 193 Penalty for sitting and voting before taking an oath or when disqualified. Article 194 Powers, Privileges, and Immunities of State Legislatures and Members. Article 195 Salaries and Allowances of Members. Article 196 Provisions regarding introduction and passing of bills. Article 197 Restriction on powers of Legislative Council in respect of bills. Article 198 Special procedure in respect of money bills. Article 199 Definition of money bills. Article 200 Assent to bills by the Governor. The State Legislature, Articles 201 to 212, continued. Article 201 Bills reserved for the President's consideration. Article 202's Annual Financial Statement, State Budget. Article 203 Procedure in Legislature with respect to estimates. Article 204 Appropriation Bills. Article 205 Supplementary, Additional, or Excess Grants. Article 206 Votes on Account, Votes of Credit, and Exceptional Grants. Article 207 Special Provisions as to Financial Bills. Article 208 Rules of Procedure in the Legislature of a State. Article 209 Regulation by Law of Procedure in the Legislature of the State in relation to financial business. Article 210 Language to be used in the Legislature. Article 211 Restriction on discussion in the Legislature. Article 212 Courts not to inquire into proceedings of the Legislature. Legislative powers of the Governor. Article 213. Article 213 Power of Governor to promulgate ordinances. High Courts in the States. Articles 214 to 231. Article 214 High Courts for States. Article 215 High Courts to be courts of record. Article 216 Constitution of High Courts. Article 217 Appointment and conditions of the office of a judge of a High Court. Article 218 Application of certain provisions relating to the Supreme Court to High Courts. Article 219 Oath or affirmation by judges of High Courts. Article 220 Restriction on practice after being a permanent judge. Article 221 Salaries and allowances of judges. Article 222 Transfer of a judge from one high court to another. Article 223 Appointment of acting Chief Justice. Article 224 Appointment of additional and acting judges. Article 224A Appointment of retired judges at sittings of high courts. Article 225 Jurisdiction of existing high courts. Article 226 Power of high courts to issue certain writs. Article 227 Power of superintendence over all courts by the High Court. Article 228 Transfer of certain cases to High Court. Article 229 Officers and Servants of the High Court. Article 230 Extension of jurisdiction of High Courts to Union Territories. Article 231 Establishment of a common High Court for two or more states. Subordinate courts. Articles 232 से 237. Article 232 Appointments of District Judges. Article 233 Appointment of District Judges. Article 234 Recruitment of persons other than district judges to the judicial service. Article 235 Control over subordinate courts. Article 236 Interpretation. Article 237 Application of the provisions of this chapter to certain class or classes of magistrates. Part 7. States and Part B of the first schedule, Articles 238 repealed. Article 238, repealed. Part 8. The Union Territories, Articles 239 to 242. Article 239 Administration of Union Territories. Article 239A Creation of local legislatures or Council of Ministers or both for certain Union Territories. Article 239A Special Provisions with respect to Delhi. Article 239 A provision in case of failure of constitutional machinery in National Capital Territory of Delhi. Article 240 Power of President to make regulations for Union Territories. Article 241 High Courts for Union Territories. Article 242, repealed. Part 9. The Panchayats, Articles 243-243. Article 243 Definitions of Panchayati Raj System. Article 243 Gram Sabha. Article 243B Constitution of Panchayats. Article 243C Composition of Panchayats. Article 243D Reservation of seats. Article 243E Duration of Panchayats. Article 243F Disqualifications for membership. Article 243G Powers, Authority, and Responsibilities of Panchayats. Article 243H Powers to impose taxes by and funds of the Panchayats. Article 243I Constitution of Finance Commission to review financial position. Article 243J Audit of accounts of Panchayats. Article 243K Elections to the Panchayats. Article 243L Application to Union Territories. Article 243M Part not to apply to certain areas. Article 243N Continuance of existing laws and Panchayats. Article 243O Bar 2 Interference by courts in electoral matters. Part 6. Articles 251 से 300. Relations between the Union and the States, Articles 251 to 263. Article 251 Inconsistency between laws made by Parliament and laws made by the state legislatures. Article 252 Power of Parliament to legislate for two or more states by consent. Article 253 Legislation for giving effect to international agreements. Article 254 Inconsistency between laws made by Parliament and state legislatures. Article 255 Requirements as to recommendations and previous sanctions to be regarded as matters of procedure only. Article 256 Obligation of states and the Union. Article 257 Control of the Union over states in certain cases. Article 258 Power of the Union to confer powers on states in certain cases. Article 258A Power of states to entrust functions to the Union. Article 259 Armed forces in states in Part B of the first schedule, repealed. Article 260 Jurisdiction of the Union in relation to territories outside India. Article 261 Public Acts, Records, and Judicial Proceedings. Article 262 Adjudication of disputes relating to waters of interstate rivers or river valleys. Article 263 Provisions with respect to an interstate council. Finance, property, contracts, and suits. Articles 264 से 300. Article 264 Interpretation. Article 265 Taxes not to be imposed save by authority of law. Article 266 Consolidated Funds and Public Accounts of India and of the States. Article 267 Contingency Fund. Article 268 Duties levied by the Union but collected and appropriated by the states. Article 269 Taxes levied and collected by the Union but assigned to the states. Article 270 Taxes levied and distributed between the Union and the states. Article 271 Surcharge on certain duties and taxes for purposes of the Union. Article 272 Taxes which are levied and collected by the Union and may be distributed between the Union and the states, repealed. Article 273 Grants in lieu of export duty on jute and jute products. Article 274 Prior recommendation of the President required to bills affecting taxation in which states are interested. Article 275 Grants from the Union to certain states. Article 276 Taxes on professions, trades, callings, and employments. Article 277 Saving of certain taxes. Article 278 Agreement with states in Part B of the First Schedule on Financial Arrangements, repealed. Article 279 Calculation of net proceeds, etc. Article 280 Finance Commission. Article 281 Recommendations of the Finance Commission. Article 282 Expenditure defrayable by the Union or a state out of its revenues. Article 283 Custody, etc. of consolidated funds, contingency funds, and monies credited to the public accounts. Article 284 Custody of suitors' deposits and other monies received by public servants and courts. Article 285 Exemption of property of the Union from state taxation. Article 286 Restrictions as to imposition of tax on the sale or purchase of goods. Article 287 Exemption from taxes on electricity. Article 288 Exemption from taxation by states in respect of water or electricity in certain cases. Article 289 Exemption of property and income of a state from union taxation. Article 290 Adjustment in respect of certain expenses and pensions. Article 290A Annual payment to certain Devaswam funds. Article 291 Privy Purses, repealed. Article 292 Borrowing by the Government of India. Article 293 Borrowing by states. Article 294 Succession to property, assets, rights, liabilities, and obligations. Article 295 Succession to property, assets, rights, liabilities, and obligations in other cases. Article 296 Property accruing by escheat or lapse or as bona vacantia. Article 297 Things of value within territorial waters or continental shelf and resources of the exclusive economic zone to west in the Union. Article 298 Power to carry on trade, etc. Article 299 Contracts. Article 300 Suits and Proceedings. Part 7. Articles 301 से 395. Trade, commerce, and intercourse within the territory of India. Articles 301 to 307. Article 301 Freedom of trade, commerce, and intercourse throughout India. Article 302 Power of Parliament to impose restrictions on trade, commerce, and intercourse. Article 303 Restrictions on legislative powers of the Union and states with regard to trade and commerce. Article 304 Restrictions on trade, commerce, and intercourse among states. Article 305 Saving of existing laws and laws providing for state monopolies. Article 306 Power of certain states in Part B of the first schedule to impose restrictions on trade and commerce, repealed. Article 307 Appointment of authority for carrying out the purposes of Articles 301 to 304. Services under the Union and the States, Articles 308 to 323. Article 308 Interpretation. Article 309 Recruitment and conditions of service of persons serving the Union or a state. Article 310 Tenure of office of persons serving the Union or a state. Article 311 Dismissal, removal, or reduction in rank of persons employed in civil capacities under the Union or a state. Article 312 All India Services. Article 312A Power of Parliament to vary or revoke conditions of service of officers of certain services. Article 313 Transitional Provisions. Article 314 Provision for protection of existing services, repealed. Public Service Commissions, Articles 315 से 323. Article 315 Public Service Commissions for the Union and States. Article 316 Appointment and Term of Office of Members. Article 317 Removal and Suspension of a Member. Article 318 Power to make regulations. Article 319 Prohibition as to the holding of offices by members of Commission on ceasing to be such members. Article 320 Functions of Public Service Commissions. Article 321 Power to extend functions of Public Service Commissions. Article 322 Expenses of Public Service Commissions. Article 323 Reports of Public Service Commissions. Tribunals, Articles 323, 323b. Article 323 Administrative Tribunals. Article 323b Tribunals for other matters. Elections, Articles 324, 329. Article 324 Superintendence, Direction, and Control of Elections to be vested in an Election Commission. Article 325 No person to be ineligible for inclusion in, or to claim to be included in, a special electoral roll on grounds of religion, race, caste, or sex. Article 326 Elections to the House of the People and to the Legislative Assemblies of States to be on the basis of adult suffrage. Article 327 Power of Parliament to make provision with respect to elections. Article 328 Power of Legislature of a state to make provision with respect to elections. Article 329 Bar to interference by courts in electoral matters. Article 329A Special provision as to elections to Parliament in the case of Prime Minister and Speaker, repealed. Part 16 Special provisions relating to certain classes, Articles 330 to 342. Article 330 Reservation of seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the House of the People. Article 331 Representation of the Anglo-Indian community in the House of the People, abolished in 2019. Article 332 Reservation of seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the legislative assemblies of the states. Article 333 Representation of the Anglo-Indian community in the legislative assemblies of the states, abolished in 2019. Article 334 Reservation of seats and special representation to cease after a certain period. Article 335 Claims of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes to services and posts. Article 336 Special provision for Anglo-Indian community in certain services. Article 337 Special provision for educational grants for the benefit of the Anglo-Indian community. Article 338 National Commission for Scheduled Castes. Article 338A National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. Article 338B National Commission for Backward Classes. Article 339 Control of the Union over the administration of scheduled areas and the welfare of scheduled tribes. Article 340 Appointment of a commission to investigate the conditions of backward classes. Article 341 Scheduled castes. Article 342 Scheduled tribes. Official language. Articles 343 से 351. Article 343 Official language of the Union. Article 344 Commission and Committee of Parliament on Official Language. Article 345 Official language of a state. Article 346 Official languages for communication between one state and another or between a state and the Union. Article 347 Special provision relating to language spoken by a section of the population of a state. Article 348 Language to be used in the Supreme Court and in the High Courts and for acts, bills, etc. Article 349 Special procedure for enactment of certain laws relating to language. Article 350 Language to be used in representations for redress of grievances. Article 350A Facilities for instruction in mother tongue at primary stage. Article 350B Special Officer for Linguistic Minorities. Article 351 Directive for Development of the Hindi Language. Emergency Provisions. Articles 352 से 360. Article 352 Proclamation of Emergency. Article 353 Effect of Proclamation of Emergency. Article 354 Application of provisions relating to the distribution of revenues while a proclamation of emergency is in operation. Article 355 Duty of the Union to protect states against external aggression and internal disturbance. Article 356 Provisions in case of failure of constitutional machinery in states, Precedence Rule. Article 357 Exercise of legislative powers under proclamation issued under Article 356. Article 358 Suspension of provisions of Article 19 during emergencies. Article 359 Suspension of enforcement of fundamental rights during emergencies. Article 360 Provisions as to financial emergency. Amendment of the Constitution, Articles 361 to 367. Article 361 Protection of President and Governors. Article 362 Rights and Privileges of Rulers of Indian States, repealed. Article 363 Bar to interference by courts in disputes arising out of treaties, agreements, etc. Article 364 Special provisions as to major ports and aerodromes. Article 365 Effect of failure to comply with, or to give effect to, directions given by the Union. Article 366 Definitions. Article 367 Interpretation. Temporary, transitional, and special provisions, Articles 368 to 395. Article 368 Power of Parliament to amend the Constitution. Article 369 Temporary power of Parliament to make laws. Article 370 Special Status of Jammu and Kashmir, abrogated in 2019. Article 371 to 371 Jules Special Provisions for various states. Article 372 Continuance in force of existing laws and their adaptation. Article 373 Power of President to make orders in respect of transitional provisions. Article 374 Provisions as to judges of the Federal Court and proceedings pending. Article 375 Courts, authorities, and officers to continue to function. Article 376 Provisions as to judges of high courts. Article 377 Provisions as to Controller and Auditor General of India. Article 378 Provisions as to the Public Service Commissions. Article 378 A Special Provision as to the duration of Andhra Pradesh Legislative Assembly, repealed. Article 379 to 391 omitted. These articles were related to provisions during the transition from British India to the Republic of India. Article 392 Power of the President to remove difficulties in the implementation of the Constitution. Article 393 Short title of the Constitution. This Constitution may be called the Constitution of India. Article 394 Commencement of certain provisions related to citizenship, elections, and temporary provisions. Article 394A Authoritative text in Hindi of the Constitution. Article 395 Repeal of the Indian Independence Act, 1947 and Government of India Act, 1935. Schedules of the Indian Constitution. First schedule lists states and union territories. Second schedule deals with salaries and allowances of constitutional authorities. Third schedule contains oaths and affirmations for various offices. Fourth schedule specifies seat allocation in Rajya Sabha. Fifth schedule provides for administration of scheduled areas and tribes. Sixth schedule governs tribal areas in Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram. Seventh schedule divides power into union, state, and concurrent lists. Eighth schedule recognizes 22 official languages of India. Ninth schedule protects certain laws from judicial review. 10th schedule contains the anti-defection law for MPs and MLAs. 11th schedule defines Panchayati Raj powers and functions. 12th schedule specifies municipalities' powers and responsibilities. 1. First Amendment, 1951 empowered the state to make special provisions for socially and educationally backward classes, added the 9th schedule to protect land reform and other laws from judicial review. 2. Second Amendment, 1952 adjusted the scale of representation in the Lok Sabha by amending Article 81. 3. Third Amendment, 1954 revised trade and commerce provisions concerning Part B states. 4. Fourth Amendment, 1955 included more acts in the 9th schedule, modified property rights and compensation in Article 31. 5. Fifth Amendment, 1955 empowered the President to amend the 1st and 4th schedules regarding scheduled areas. 6. Sixth Amendment, 1956 amended the Union and State lists concerning taxation. 7. Seventh Amendment, 1956 implemented the recommendations of the States Reorganization Commission, reorganized states based on linguistic lines. 8. Eighth Amendment, 1960 extended reservation of seats for SCs, STs, and Anglo-Indians in legislatures for 10 more years. 9. Ninth Amendment, 1960 facilitated the cession of Indian territory to Pakistan following the 1958 Indo-Pak Agreement. 10. Tenth Amendment, 1961 incorporated Dadra and Nagar Haveli into the Union of India. 11. 11th Amendment, 1961 changed the election procedures for the President and Vice President. 12th Amendment, 1962 incorporated Goa, Daman, and Diu into the Union of India. 13th Amendment, 1962 created Nagaland as a state with special provisions. 14th Amendment, 1962 incorporated Pondicherry into the Union of India, provided for the creation of legislatures for union territories. 15th Amendment, 1963 increased the retirement age of High Court judges from 60 to 62 years. 16th Amendment, 1963 empowered the state to impose reasonable restrictions on fundamental rights in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India. 17th Amendment, 1964 further amended the 9th schedule to include more land reform laws. 18th Amendment, 1966 reorganized Punjab and created Haryana. 19th Amendment, 1966 abolished the system of election tribunals, transferred the power to hear election petitions to the high courts. 20th Amendment, 1966 validated certain appointments of district judges in Uttar Pradesh. 21st Amendment, 1967 included Sindhi as the 15th language in the 8th schedule. 22nd Amendment, 1969 created a new autonomous state of Meghalaya within Assam. 23rd Amendment, 1969 extended reservation of seats for SCs, STs, and Anglo-Indians in legislatures for 10 more years. 24th Amendment, 1971 affirmed Parliament's power to amend any part of the Constitution, including fundamental rights. 25th Amendment, 1971 curtailed the right to property, introduced the concept of directive principles taking precedence over fundamental rights. 26th Amendment, 1971 abolished privy purses and privileges of former princely states. 27th Amendment, 1971 reorganized the northeastern states, created Manipur, Tripura, and Meghalaya as full states. 28th Amendment, 1972 abolished special privileges of the President and governors regarding emoluments. 29th Amendment, 1972 included two Kerala Land Reform Acts in the 9th schedule. 30th Amendment, 1972 changed the basis for appeals in the Supreme Court in civil cases. 31st Amendment, 1973 increased the Lok Sabha seats from 525 to 545. 32nd Amendment, 1973 provided special provisions for the state of Andhra Pradesh. 33rd Amendment, 1974 placed restrictions on the resignation and vacation of seats by members of Parliament and state legislatures. 34th Amendment, 1974 included 20 more Land Reform Acts in the 9th schedule. 35th Amendment, 1974 granted Sikkim the status of an associate state. 36th Amendment, 1975 made Sikkim a full-fledged state of India. 37th Amendment, 1975 provided Legislative Assembly and Council of Ministers for Arunachal Pradesh. 38th Amendment, 1975 enhanced the powers of the President and governors to promulgate ordinances. 39th Amendment, 1975 placed disputes involving the President, Vice President, Prime Minister, and Speaker beyond the jurisdiction of courts. 40th Amendment, 1976 placed more land reform laws in the 9th schedule. 41st Amendment, 1976 raised the retirement age of members. 41st Amendment, 1976 raised the retirement age of State Public Service Commission members from 60 to 62 years. 42. 42nd Amendment, 1976, known as the Mini-Constitution, it brought extensive changes, including the addition of the words socialist and secular to the preamble, and curtailed the power of judicial review. 43. 43rd Amendment, 1977, restored the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and High Courts, reversing some changes made by the 42nd Amendment. 44. 44th Amendment, 1978, reversed many provisions of the 42nd Amendment, restored civil liberties by providing that fundamental rights guaranteed by Articles 20 and 21 cannot be suspended during a national emergency. 45. 45th Amendment, 1980, extended the reservation of seats for SCs, STs, and Anglo-Indians in Parliament and state assemblies for another 10 years, up to 1990. 46. 46th Amendment, 1982, amended the Constitution to facilitate the imposition of sales tax on the sale of goods and services. 47. 47th Amendment, 1984, included 14 land reform legislations in the 9th schedule to protect them from judicial review. 48. 48th Amendment, 1984, allowed President's rule to be extended in Punjab beyond 1 year without the need for a formal emergency declaration. 49. 49th Amendment, 1984, granted constitutional status to the Tripura Tribal Areas Autonomous District Council. 50. 50th Amendment, 1984, empowered the state to provide for reservation in appointments and posts in favor of any backward class citizens under Article 16, 4. 51. 51st Amendment, 1984, provided reservation for scheduled tribes in Meghalaya, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, and Mizoram in the Lok Sabha. 52. 52nd Amendment, 1985, known as the Anti-Defection Law, added the 10th schedule to the Constitution to prevent political defections. 53. 53rd Amendment, 1986, granted statehood to Mizoram, making it the 23rd state of India. 54. 54th Amendment, 1986, increased the salaries of the President, Vice President, and Supreme Court and High Court judges. 55. 55th Amendment, 1987, provided special status to Arunachal Pradesh by amending Article 371H. 56. 56th Amendment, 1987, granted statehood to Goa, making it the 25th state of India, and formed Daman and Diu as a union territory. 57. 57th Amendment, 1987, reserved seats for scheduled tribes in the legislative assemblies of Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Nagaland. 58. 58th Amendment, 1987, provided for an authoritative Hindi translation of the Constitution. 59. 59th Amendment, 1988, empowered the government to impose an emergency in Punjab due to the prevailing security situation. 60. 60th Amendment, 1988, increased the ceiling on taxes on professions, trades, callings, and employments from 250 rupee to 2,500 rupee per annum. 61. 61st Amendment, 1989, reduced the voting age from 21 to 18 years for Lok Sabha and Assembly elections. 62. 62nd Amendment, 1989, extended the reservation of seats for SCs, STs, and Anglo-Indians in Parliament and state assemblies for another 10 years, up to 2000. 63. 63rd Amendment, 1989, repealed the changes made by the 59th Amendment, restoring the original provisions of Article 356. 64. 64th Amendment, 1990, extended President's rule in Punjab for 6 months. 65. 65th Amendment, 1990, established the National Commission for Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes, replacing the previous commission. 66. 66th Amendment, 1990 included 55 land reform laws in the 9th schedule to protect them from judicial review. 67th Amendment, 1990 extended President's rule in Punjab for another 6 months. 68th Amendment, 1991 extended President's rule in Punjab for 1 year. 69th Amendment, 1991 granted National Capital Territory status to Delhi and provided for a Legislative Assembly and Council of Ministers. 70th Amendment, 1992 included members of the Legislative Assemblies of Delhi and Pondicherry in the Electoral College for the election of the President. 71st Amendment, 1992 included Konkani, Manipuri, and Nepali languages in the 8th schedule, increasing the number of official languages to 18. 72nd Amendment, 1992 provided reservation to scheduled tribes in the Tripura Legislative Assembly. 73rd Amendment, 1993 constitutionalized the Panchayati Raj institutions by adding Part 9 to the Constitution. 74th Amendment, 1993 Udas Smiley constitutionalized urban local bodies, municipalities, by adding Part IXA to the Constitution. 75th Amendment, 1994 provided for the setting up of rent control tribunals. 76th Amendment, 1994 included the Tamil Nadu Reservation Act, which provides 69% reservation in educational institutions and government jobs, in the 9th schedule to protect it from judicial review. 77th Amendment, 1995 provided for reservation in promotions for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in government jobs by amending Article 16, 4A. 78th Amendment, 1995 added 27 land reform laws to the 9th schedule to protect them from judicial review. 79th Amendment, 1999 extended the reservation of seats for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and Anglo-Indians in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies for another 10 years, up to 2010. 80th Amendment, 2000 implemented a new sharing formula for the proceeds of union taxes between the centre and the states, based on the recommendations of the 10th Finance Commission. 81st Amendment, 2000 allowed the government to consider unfilled reserved vacancies of a year as a separate class of vacancies to be filled in subsequent years, thus nullifying the ceiling of 50% reservation on total vacancies in a year. 82nd Amendment, 2000 restored the provision for relaxation in qualifying marks and reservation in matters of promotion for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes by amending Article 335. 83rd Amendment, 2000 provided that no reservation in panchayats need be made for scheduled castes in Arunachal Pradesh, as the entire population is scheduled tribes. 84th Amendment, 2001 extended the ban on readjustment of parliamentary and assembly constituencies until the first census after 2026, while allowing delimitation to be undertaken based on the 1991 census. 85th Amendment, 2001 provided for consequential seniority in matters of promotion for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes with retrospective effect from June 1995. 86th Amendment, 2002 made education a fundamental right for children aged 6 to 14 years by inserting Article 21A. Also changed the subject matter of Article 45 and added a new fundamental duty under Article 51A. 87th Amendment, 2003 provided for the readjustment of parliamentary and assembly constituencies based on the 2001 census without altering the total number of seats. 88th Amendment, 2003 provided for service tax levied by the Union and collected and appropriated by the Union and the states. 89th Amendment, 2003 bifurcated the National Commission for Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes into two separate bodies, the National Commission for Scheduled Castes and the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. 90th Amendment, 2003 provided for reservation of seats in the Assam Legislative Assembly for Scheduled Tribes in the Bodoland Territorial Areas District. 91st Amendment, 2003 limited the size of the Council of Ministers to 15% of the legislative members and strengthened the anti-defection law. 92nd Amendment, 2003 included Bodo, Dogri, Mathili, and Santhali languages in the 8th schedule, increasing the number of official languages to 22. 93rd Amendment, 2005 empowered the state to make special provisions for the advancement of socially and educationally backward classes, including their admission in educational institutions. 94th Amendment, 2006 provided for a Minister of Tribal Welfare in the newly formed states of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. 95th Amendment, 2009 extended the reservation of seats for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and Anglo-Indians in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies for another 10 years, up to 2020. 96th Amendment, 2011 substituted Oriya for Odia in the 8th schedule to reflect the correct pronunciation. 97th Amendment, 2011 Udas Smiley granted constitutional status to cooperative societies by adding a new part IXB. 98th Amendment, 2013 empowered the Governor of Karnataka to take steps to develop the Hyderabad-Karnataka region. 99th Amendment, 2014 established the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJC, for the appointment of judges, which was later declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. 100th Amendment, 2015 implemented the India-Bangladesh Land Boundary Agreement, exchanging certain enclaves and simplifying the international boundary. 101st Amendment, 2016 Udas Smiley introduced the Goods and Services Tax, GST, creating a unified indirect tax system across India. 102nd Amendment, 2018 Udas Smiley granted constitutional status to the National Commission for Backward Classes, NCBC. 103rd Amendment, 2019 Udas Smiley provided a 10% reservation in government jobs and educational institutions for economically weaker sections, EWS, of the general category. 104th Amendment, 2020 extended the reservation of seats for scheduled castes, SCs, and scheduled tribes, STs, in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies for another 10 years, discontinued the reservation for Anglo-Indians. 105th Amendment, 2021 restored the power of state governments to identify and specify socially and educationally backward classes, SEBCs. 106th Amendment, 2023 reserved one-third of seats for women in the Lok Sabha, state legislative assemblies, and the Delhi Legislative Assembly for 15 years.